We have also seen how to work with simple HTML page to be run into a browser. Fine. Yesterday we also saw what HTML5 is, and we saw that HTML5 is the latest specification of a newer version that has come up of HTML, and we call it as HTML5. So we have seen the evolution of HTML, right? And this course is brought to you by OdinSchool, which is a technology upskilling platform, and we help you continuously acquire new skills so that you can stay skilled and stay ahead, right? So I'm Sumit Vijay Vajpayee. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and I've been dealing with all JavaScript frameworks, including Angular, React, Vue, MongoDB, Node AI, and machine learning, right? Now, today's session, we're going to focus more on understanding the client and server. Fine. So that's what we're going to focus on because we have discussed on it orally. So we have seen client is nothing but our browser. Fine. We have seen server as a software that we just discussed on, right? But we never discussed on the architecture. Now today, because we're going to talk about links, we're going to talk about lists and images. It's very important for us to understand that how the client and the server communicate, right? And once we're done with using links, lists, and images, then we're going to start off with HTML5 picture element. So today's session, we are focusing more on working with the elements of HTML. So we are mostly done with the theoretical part that we got started. Now most of the sessions which are going to be there are going to have 90% hands-on in it. The same goes with today's session. So we're going to invest more of our time in Visual Studio Code and having hands-on rather than talking more on the UI part. But before we move on, as I said, we will be talking about the client and the server, right? So let's understand this client server architecture. Now, when we say we are creating any HTML page, right? So when we create any HTML page, that needs to be viewed in the inside your browser. So we saw the first way, which was there, which was by using File Explorer. Fine. So we had a File Explorer which went ahead and shown you with a local drive, which was F drive, right? But this is always not the case, because in a real time we would want this file. So what's the problem with this file drive? This is local. It can be there only for a machine. It cannot be shared worldwide. So we don't want that. So we always go back and make use of a server, so that this server can help us to make our page to be accessible to the outside world. So there's always a client and there's always a server. Now we are using live server. That's a different story altogether, which is a dummy software given to you by Visual Studio Code. But there exists a server. So what's the job of server? The job of server is to take in your HTML. So let's say you have written an index.html page, and this index.html page, which has your code, is being there present onto your server, right? Now the interaction starts when the client makes a request to the server, right? And server responds, right? So we say the client is making a request and the server is actually giving a response. Now this response ideally is a stream of HTML code that is sent from the server back to the client. So when the client initiates a request, so server is not going to initiate the request. It's always client who initiates a request, and the server just fetches out, looks out for index.html page where in its location, where it is in the file drive. It understands, it reads index.html page. It does not need any extra processing. Fine. So it just reads the contents of HTML page and sends as a response back to the client. And what does client do? Client goes back and has this HTML to be parsed. So once the client, the browser, parses it, so here we are talking about client being the browser, and here the server being live server. So in our case, it's live server, but it can be IIS, Tomcat, Apache, any of the other softwares which are available. But the job of server is basically to emit out HTML in the form of a response, and that the client would basically understand, right? That's how the things work. Now it's very important to understand that when we are working with such a client server architecture, right, anything that you're doing with HTML is happening on the client side, until unless okay, you click on some link or you click on the button that takes you back to the server. So we'll just talk about how these things are going to work, okay, as we move ahead. But as at a start, okay, I want you to understand that there exists something called as client and server which can interact with each other, and it's your browser who basically takes care of requesting something to the server side, right? Now if you go into very depth of it, there's a lot more things to be covered in. We have just summed it up in a very simple manner from a bird's eye view, because if you talk about client can never or may not be directly interact with server, because it may go through your DNS server, it can go through your servers that your internet service provider has, and then it can go through the web and then go to the server, fine. So that's not what we are discussing here, but we just say, okay, the client is able to locate the server is capable of understanding the HTML and sending it as a response back to the client, and the client understands HTML and renders it into the browser, right? That's what we have talked about right now. Now this client can also be, so if you see, this doesn't have to be a what we say as an entity which is only a browser from your laptop things. It can be from your PC. It can also be from your smartphones. Now this smartphone, laptop and PC, these are allowing you to use browsers as the client, and they can just make requests over the web to the server, and server can respond the things back with HTML. So for each of these clients, which can be a browser from a PC, which can be a browser from a smartphone, which can be a browser from the laptop, you will just get all of the things as HTML. Now this HTML, why HTML? Because the browser can only understand HTML, and HTML is what it will be understanding and rendering it out in the UI. So that's what is the client server architecture, right? Now let's talk about more on this client server architecture. Now in this, the first thing that we're going to talk about are hyperlinks. So if you remember, on the first day we discussed on what is an hypertext. So hypertext is something which allows you to have hyperlinks, fine. So text containing hyperlinks is hypertext. So hypertext markup language is nothing but a text containing hyperlinks, and these are the hyperlinks. So HTML links are nothing but hyperlinks, fine. So you can click on the link and jump to another document, fine. Now it doesn't have to be a link which is there in your website. It can also be another link. We'll talk about different types of links which are available, fine. And you do it by using an anchor tag, right? So as you see, this anchor tag that we have mentioned, so this is the anchor tag that we have used, fine. So you can see start and end of anchor tag, and you are specifying this as an URL. So the URL is specified by using href, right? So this href is the hyper reference where you want it to point to, right? That can be any of the links that you're talking about. So let's go back and have a simple example of working with this hyperlink. So let's create in my Visual Studio Code a new file. So I've opened up a folder. This folder is module 3, and this is an empty folder as of now. And in this module 3, I'm going to create, so I'll select module 3 so that you can see it's highlighted. And I'll just create a new file, and I will call it as hyperlinks, or maybe just links.html. Fine. Now in this link, now here, as we saw on the first day, we can go back and write HTML tags by hand, fine. So I can go back and say HTML, then Visual Studio will end it for me. Now I need to write it head, I need to write body and things, but because I'm working with an IDE, which is the integrated development environment, it can take care of giving me some intelligence. Now can you see, if I just use HTML, the second option which comes up is HTML:5. So HTML:5 is a Emmet plugin, fine, that will be giving out some code out of the box so that I don't need to type in everything by hand. Now here you would observe that I have been given with that Emmet plugin the HTML content, right? Now it's not mandatory that you have to have all of these, but let that be there because that's what is generated by Visual Studio Code, right? So here we are interested in having the links, so and the heading in an h1 tag which we used yesterday as well. Well, I'm just going to say links, okay, hyperlinks which are there, And now I would go back and use an anchor tag. So this A tag is something which would have a text within it, fine, to go to something. So let's say I'm going to say go to Google, right? Now what this specifically refers to is I'm having the hyperreference, mapping it to google.com, right? Now if I do this, that's what is going to tell my browser that please, if the user clicks on this link, which is going to be identified by an underscore sign, it's going to be underlined, and this go to Google is what is going to be shown. So if I just right click and open with live server, fine, you would see that I do have, oops, yeah, so I do have this hyperlink being shown, right? So go to Google as an hyperlink allows me to click onto it. Now if I just show you what this does, if I'm just hovering the mouse over it, can you see on the extreme left hand side downstairs here, kind of a status bar, you can see www.google.com. Now what you observe with this HTML is you can have a reference to a location that we have given. It's an online URL right now, what you're using in. And when you click on go to Google, it's actually going to load, refer to the href that this anchor tag refers to. So if I click onto it, I'm just going to back and you can see google.com is what is loaded. Right? Now, when you do this, you have history being maintained by the browser. Now, what does this mean? Because whenever all the links that I'm clicking on, I can just click on the back button here to see that I can revisit my original page. So whenever you work with links, browser maintains a history. Right? So anchor tags are tags which allow you to have your text. Now it doesn't always have to be text. We'll talk about that as well when we talk about images too. So when I click on this link, fine, it navigates me to the hyperreference, right? Okay. Now let's say, suppose now here we are referring to different URL, which is an online URL that I'm going to refer to. But what if I want to refer to a different portion in or a different page into my web application? So let's say I'm going to create here in module 3, I'm going to create another file because we're going to have a look at that. And let's say, for example, I'm going to have lists and I'll say lists.html. Again, I'm going to generate the HTML out of the box by saying HTML:5 and hit enter. Fine. Once you do that, this is emitted out. And here I'm just going to have lists in HTML, right? That's an H1 tag. Now what if now these are two pages into my website. So let's say module 3 is the name of my website and these are the two pages like you had about, like you had index.html, fine, or careers or contact. You can have different pages, right? And these pages, as you're using, will be just specifying, okay, what if I want to interact with these two pages? So now with links.html page, I would want, when I have a link onto it, it should go to list.html. So for that, I'm again going to go back and have, now if you want it on the new line, we use a new tag that's called as break. Fine, it's again a self-contained tag, as you can see end of it there itself. And now if I'm using an anchor tag that just says, let's say, go to lists page, right? And here now if I just do this and view it into the browser, you will see it's plain text. It's not a link. Why it's not a link? Because it's missing an href as an attribute. So it is important for any anchor tag to work to have this hyperreference, and the hyperreference would go, now here you saw this is an absolute URL. Fine. So what you have given is an absolute URL. It means you have a complete path being given. Now because I'm working with my local resource, I can work with what we call as relative URL. So relative URL doesn't have to be an absolute one. Fine. It can be just referring to the contents in the current folder. So from the current folder, I'm going to refer to this lists.html page. Okay. And if I just save and go back to Visual Studio Code, you can see now it's converted into link. You can see the visited link can be shown in this way. That's what the default styling of the browser is, but we can change the styling, and we can see about more on styling part when we go back to the CSS. Right now we are only focusing on the links, which is hyperlinks of HTML5. Now when I click on go to list page, I will just be seeing lists in HTML, which is only showing my h1 tag because it's not having any other content which we are going to do as we go. But onto this as well, it's going to go back and have the history being maintained, because if I click on the back button, it is going to show me the previous page which I visited. Right? Okay. Now if suppose, so you can see the history in picture here. If I'm just going to go back and say images.html page, in my images, let's say I again go back and say in an h1 tag, images in HTML. Okay. Now when I do this, let's say from your lists.html page, I'm going to have another anchor tag. Fine. So let's say now you can see A. If I just press A and press a tab, it is actually going to generate an anchor tag for me. So my Visual Studio Code allows me to do that. Okay. So I'll say A, press a tab, and will auto complete the things for me. Now because I want to refer to the images, I'm going to go back and have images.html, and here I'll say go to images. Here go to images page, and when I click it, I would go back into the images page. So let me run. So this is what I refresh. It's not necessary, but that's what I do. So let's say if I go to list page, but in list page, I'm going to go back to my images page. So when I click on that, fine, you can see I'm going back to images page. But in the history, what's added? So if I just hit back, I go back to the lists in HTML. That's a list page. And if I go back, I again go back to my hyperlinks. So browser automatically maintains a history of the links that you are adding it and the user is trying to visit. Right? It can even go forward. Okay, as you can see, you're going forward, you can go back, and that's what link allows you to do. Now there's another part to this hyperlink. Now another part says, now we have seen when I'm referring to this anchor tag. So let's talk about another property attribute that is there with anchor tag, and that's called as target, which is kind of important. So we understood here working with different types of URL. One is a absolute URL, one is a relative one. Right? Now whenever I click on this google.com, you will see it's opening in the current window. Right? Because by default, when you say it's being the browser is being designed in such a way that it understands, yes, it has to load by default the links into the current browser window, okay, or the tab that you have clicked in. So that's the default. So what we say, there are different values for what we call as target as an attribute. So there is an attribute, as you understand, as you saw on the first day, href is an attribute. Right? On the same lines, as href is an attribute, I can also have an attribute called as target. Now what this target does, if I just hover the mouse over it, you see it specifies where to display the linked URL. It is the name of or keyword for a browsing context, a tab, window, or even an iframe. Right? Now here there are different values. By default, there's a value called as _self. So if I just do this and see, there will be no difference because that's the default value. Right? Now here, if I just go back and say _blank, now what happens is this _blank is a value, it's a predefined value that we understand, or rather the browser understands that, okay, I need to open up into a new window. So if I just see and now click on go to Google, you will see it's not loading into the same browser, but it's actually creating a different browser window and opening up it into a new tab. That's what target does. Okay. Now if you are using these values, okay, you understand that, okay, if I want to open it into the current window, then I'll be using well, I'll not be giving any target, but if I want it to be a different window altogether without me navigating the user from this page to another, fine, so let that page be already there so that he can use other links also to navigate or open up, then I'll be using target is equal to _blank. That's what you use target for. Now, this target underscore blank is a value that you have given. Now, there's another variation of this anchor tag to be used in. Let's see what that variation is. Now, the variation means, as we have used these to refer to different pages, let that be an absolute URL, let that be a relative URL. But I can also use anchor tag to navigate to different portion of the same page, right? So you can have a same page having n number of contents inside it, and you can have links that map to a different portion of the same page. Now, how do you do that? Let's see. Here, I'm going to have, I'll say, use of anchor tag .html, and what I'm going to do with this HTML is I'm going to imagine, let's say there are a lot of contents, fine. So let's say, oops. So there are lots of content onto a page. So let's imagine a scenario where I'm having this page, and this page is going to have some lot of content within it. Okay, so it's something which is not having all the things being printed here, but I need to basically go back and scroll. So when I scroll, only then the other contents are visible. Okay, so if I do this, I have to have, or and if I'm having some links, so let's say there are some links, and if you click on that link, what you actually want to do is you want to navigate to a different portion of the same page, but something which you don't have to scroll in. That's why the anchor tag can also help in. Okay, so the anchor tag can help you to navigate to a different portion of the same page rather than navigate to a different page altogether. Okay, so instead of navigating to a different page, okay, or a URL, it can also point to a different portion of the same page. So let's see how we can use anchor tag with that. Now, if I go back and use a simple heading, let's say here, I'm going to go back and create some content. Okay, so here I'm going to have, let's say, chapters, and the first chapter that actually kicks in, or maybe I can have some anchor tags initially. So I'll say, let's say, chapter 1, fine, which is HTML5. Okay. Now, or maybe I can just say chapter 1, not a problem. And here I'll just say href is equal to, given some value. We'll talk about what this href will contain. So it will neither contain an complete URL, it would not contain even the relative URL. So we'll talk about it. So on the same lines, I am going to have some more links, and let this be chapter 2, let this be chapter 3. Fine. Now, for each of these chapters that the links are being shown, if you just view it into the browser, so these are the chapters. Fine. So chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 are the links which are created, but they do not point to anything else. Now, even you see, if href is blank, it still goes back and shows the things as hyperlink because href is present. Okay. Now, if I have HTML5 as a chapter, fine, and maybe I'm going to have a paragraph tag. We'll talk about, okay, what these are, or maybe even a div tag for that matter. We'll talk about divs and all. This is just an container element, fine, which can contain n number of other items inside it. So we'll talk about div, p, and span later on, but let's say this is just a container tag which can contain some text. Now let there be some text which I can just copy paste from here. Can be any text, all absolutely. I'm just pasting it n number of times so that we do have some larger text being shown into the UI, right? So I can even give some break statements in between, fine, so that they come into new lines, right? So let's say, let's view this into the browser. That's your first content inside it. Okay. Now, what if I also want these contents to be there for chapter 2 and also for chapter 3? Now, on the same lines, like I have copied it for the first chapter. So this is what we copied in. I'm going to do it for the second chapter as well. So let's say the second chapter is CSS3. So this is my first div tag. Fine, I'm going to have another div tag to which I'm going to have an h2, which is the second heading, saying as CSS3. And for this, I'm going to have some content of CSS3 being mapped, and the content will be these. So I'm just going to paste it n number of times so that we have to go back and scroll. So that's my content for the second div element. Right now, if you have a look, if I just go back and see my UI, that's my CSS3. So you can see I've pasted it along so that I can scroll back and see, okay, this is the kind of scrolling things which I require. So I have HTML5. Maybe these breaks I can get rid of in the HTML5 thing. Right, and now I'll have the third things, which is h2, and I would say, let's say HTML5 and CSS3. That's a combination of both, let's say, and I'm just going to paste some content within it. So I'm going to copy both. So I'm going to copy HTML5 thing, and as well as I'm going to copy the CSS3. It actually doesn't matter because it's the same content what you've been copy and pasting, but just to give an impression that yes, we are working with some items which we have to actually go back and scroll down. So you have three div tags. This is the first one, there's a second one, and this is the third one. Okay. So now in this div tags, okay, that we have mentioned, so for HTML5, CSS3, and HTML5 and CSS3, all these I need to go back and just scroll it down to see all the contents, because if you see, I have to just scroll down and have all these contents being visited. But these chapters can allow me to go back to the element that I want to physically pinpoint to. And what's the element that I want to pinpoint to? Is chapter 1 should go back to HTML5, that's okay. Chapter 2 should go back to CSS3. So in my first div tag, I'm going to have these break statements to just go off maybe, so that we have some content be shown in a better way. Okay. So that's our HTML. And if I click on chapter 2, now I would want it to go to CSS3. Now, right now, if I'm clicking on any of these items, it's just going to reload the page, because that's what Anchor do. Okay, Anchor as a tag do. So when I'm clicking onto it, I'm just clicking on these items so that these items are just refreshing the entire page. But I would want, when I click on chapter 2, to go to chapter 2, and chapter 2 is CSS3. And then I click on chapter 3. Chapter 3 is HTML5 and CSS3, which is downstairs, and that's what I want it to be shown, right? So let's do that. Now how do you do it? By using the href. Now these div tags that we have mentioned, they all can have an ID. Now what is an ID? ID is a unique identifier of a particular element into the UI. So we say let the ID be chapter 1, because this h2 as an heading is referring to HTML5 as a chapter 1. On the same lines, I'm going to have different IDs to each of this chapter, and even this h2 tag, I'm going to have chapter 3. So chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 refers to each of these elements which are h2, and now what this href can do is it can use hash. Hash means a different portion of the same page. So I'm not using a relative URL or an absolute one, but I'm using an hash sign, and hash sign tells that, okay, kindly refer to an element which is identified by the name chapter 1 as an ID. Kindly, so the second link would go back to chapter 2, and the third link would go back to chapter 3. That's what we mentioned by what we call as bookmarks. So this is bookmarking, and if I see the UI now, if I just refresh, now you can see chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 being shown you as a link. So if I click on chapter 1, that's HTML5. If I click on chapter 2, that's CSS3. If I click on chapter 3, again I'm having HTML5 to be specified. Now you alternatively can also have, let's say for example, if you're on chapter 2, now you see the problem that you don't have any link to go up. Fine. So what you can do is you can have a link here somewhere downstairs and have something that can navigate you to the top. Okay, so you can have a link here, okay, maybe somewhere, and let's say go to top, and when you click onto it, you can actually put back some ID to this chapters, fine, so that you immediately go back to the top of the page. Fine, so there are different ways. This can be one of it. So we saw links which allow you to have references to different links which can be with different windows. You can open it in a different window. In the current window, you can have relative URL, absolute URL, and you basically can also refer to a different portion of the same page, right? So that's how you make use of hyperlinks, right? Right. So once we are done with links, let's talk about lists. So what are lists? Lists allow you to have a set of related items to be shown, right? So you can have two types of list. One is an ordered list, and second is an ordered list, right? So when you work with lists, they allow you to represent a collection of items, okay, inside either an ordered or an unordered list. So when you talk about ordered, you can have just some bullets, fine. Whereas when you say ordered list, you can have the numbers, fine. So you can have different values into it. Let's consider how do we work with this list. Now let's see how do we work with list. Now we already have the list.html, okay, which I'll be opening up. And in this list.html page, I'm going to get rid of this anchor tag, which I don't want it in here now. It was just for the demonstration purpose for links. So let's use some new lists. Now here, I'm going to go back and say, instead of lists in HTML, I'm just going to go back and say, let's say beverages. And here, I'm going to have a UL. Now UL specifically means unordered list, which is going to render things into a bulleted value. Now to this UL, I do go back and have every item being represented by what we call as an LI. So this LI as a list item is going to have different values content inside it, right? So let's say you have tea, you have coffee, and let's say you have cold coffee. Right? Now these are the beverages that will be listed down in an unordered list, right? So these beverages that are being listed, you can see the list is represented by using UL and LI, and these ULs and LI as a list item allow me to specifically understand, okay, that's an bulleted list which I'm going to get, and that's how the rendering can be done. Because normally with HTML we have examples where we have some lists to be shown in, for example courses, for example products. Any of these items to be shown in can be done by using this list. Now with this UL, by default you have three different types of the values that you can give in. So if I just say UL and if I say type, you have been having a different type altogether. So let's say if I use disk, fine, that's the default value. Now if I just use circle, oops, that's what you get as an empty circle, right? Okay, so you do have different values being given to this type, okay, where I'm mentioning this list can actually be rendering me the list of items, and I can have a type to be given in to change how I want the list to be specified in. Now I can give different values, like as I've said, for the UL, I can have the types being given, okay, and that UL is going to specify, okay, these are the items which have to be represented by the LI, and I can give back some values, and those values can be different things on it. Now here you have different ways as well. So like I've said, circle, a disk, and there's also square. So I'll just say square, and if you see, you have square. That's how the square are being visited. Okay. Now if I'm specifically referring out, now I can even combine these together. Like link can refer to even an anchor tag. So if I do this, I can refer to, let's say, href referring to something, right? So you can see the list is also a link, right? So you can have nesting of items, fine, and it's good practice always to end the items before the other item finishes off. Okay, so but it's not error, fine. If I just paste, okay, you will still see the browser showing this as a link. It's not an error, but obviously that's not a good practice. Okay, so you should be making sure that you end the items, because if you just paste this into the validation will not be successful because you do not have the nesting of the elements being done in a correct manner. So the element that starts last, okay, as a part in the nesting should also end first, fine, and then the subsequent elements should be kicking in. So that's your anchor tag that you can use in the list as well. Right, now these were ordered list, unordered list. Now on the same lines, you can have ordered list as well. So I'm just going to copy the LIs, which are the link items, and I am going to have an OL being represented. Now by default, this OL as well takes in LI as an argument, and if you go in, tea, hot coffee and cold coffee are the values that are put in as a child element of OL. So the list item that I'm specifying by default has 1, 2 and 3. But if I go back and change the type, if I say type, as you can see, 1 capital A, small a, even that can be there. You can see small ABC. If I press small I, Roman numbers, fine, with the capital case as well. So you can use all these types with OL. Right? So that's how you work with lists. Right? Now, if you want to have nested lists being created, you can also do that. So here, if I want the nesting to be happening, let's say for example, when I'm working up with nesting of a particular entity, I need to go back and have the item to be marked with UL or even an OL for that matter. So let's say if this coffee is what I want as a sub element of another item, which I will say as coffee. So what I can do is within this li, fine, within this li, I can go back and have these UL to be present. So I may want it to be an unordered list, I may want it to be an ordered list, that's fine. So I choose it to be an unordered list and I'll just have an li. Fine, I'll just format. Right. So in this case, what's happening? You're having a second li, which is coffee, nested with another elements. And if I just view this into my UI, that's how the things look like. So I do have tea, I do have coffee, and coffee are having two types, which is hot coffee and cold coffee. That's how nesting can be done. You can have levels of nesting, fine, that can be achieved, and this nesting is being again achieved by using either OL or UL depending on how you're wanting it. So if I just change it to OL, then it will be 1 and 2, and if I just have my normal UL being specified, which is unordered, that's how the links, the lists are going to be shown. Okay. That's how you nest lists, right? So after links and lists, we move on to the third part, which are images. So let's understand how do you work with images. So we have seen this is how we can have find the link, the lists being created, either the collected or ordered or unordered set of items. Now here with HTML images, what you can do is you can have images to improve the design and appearance of a web page, right? Now, as you know, a picture can be worth more than 1,000 words, and that's what actually images do, right? And with latest websites being created or web applications being created, you see images having very much importance, right? You can just use images as a background, you can use images as conveying some message, you can have some images to be shown something onto it, or images to be even drawn onto it. So you see images are a very important part of a web, and that's what is done by using an image tag. So the HTML image tag is used to embed an image in a web page, right? So the image tag is empty and it contains attributes only, and it does not have to have the closing bracket. Now, till now, we have been using tags. So we use two types of tags, right? One, which was a companion tag. So in the companion tag, so in companion, we always had, like anchor tag was a companion tag. Here we had some text and we always had an end of anchor tag being there. So we always have a companion to it, right? But if I don't want this companion, we also saw BR, which is also a self-contained tag. Meta is a self-contained tag. So in this self-contained, we always have the item being specified into the end of it in the same way. So here br/ is an self-contained tag, but now we see image is an empty tag. So what this empty tag basically means, this empty tag means that it is not going to have a companion, neither it's going to have the end of it, right? So that's what you call it as an empty tag. So you just have to create image like this, fine. You don't have to have the end of image, fine. So that's not going to be, you don't even have to say this one, fine. So that's how you can create an empty tag, which is an image as an empty tag. Now there is another value, which is, so first is the source, so which is one of the important, and that's how we understand, or the browser rather understands, that something has to be shown, right? And then we also have this alt. Alt basically means alternate text, okay, as it's being written. Now why is this alternate text required? Now why is this alternate text required? Because if the browser fails to load the image, then it is actually going to show this alternate text in place of it. Okay, that's why we require this alternate text. Fine. So let's work with this HTML image tag. Okay, now how do we do it? As I said, you do it by using, so we already have the images.html page created, and into this images I'm going to go back and specify an image tag. So again, just type an image and specify tab. This will be creating things for you. Now if you are very new to HTML, I would want you to write it by hand, okay, because these tools help you to do the things in a much easier manner, but it also helps you to not understand or writing the source and all in there. So if you are confused that okay, if source has to be written something like this or not, fine, then you should be practicing yourself by typing in src yourself, and that's a predefined attribute again, right? Now I can use any of the images, fine, which are there. So let's go back and download an image and let's refer to those images. So let's see if I can refer to HTML5 as an image. So let's come back to this. Fine, so that's an image. I'm going to store it. So I'm going to save image as, I'm going to store it, let's say on desktop. And here I'm just going to say HTML5.png. You can be any extension. So I'm just using this PNG. I'll just open up into the folder. I'll just cut this across and put it into the location that we are wanting. So let's come back in module 3, find Reveal Folder Explorer. In module 3, just go back and paste. Fine, so that's your HTML5.png. So in source, now again I have two choices. I can give an absolute URL, or even I can give a relative URL. Now because you have downloaded and kept it into the current folder, it is what I'm going to use as a relative URL. But you can also have URLs which are online URLs, fine, which are absolute ones. You can refer to some different file which is an online file altogether. And here I'm just going to go back and have my HTML5.png and the alternate text to be HTML5 image. Right now, here let me view this in the browser, and if you see around, by default it's going to show the image of the size of what it is, right? The default size of the image is what the browser is going to render. Fine. Also I'm kind of zoomed in, but if I just go back to 100%, That's how the image is going to be. So that's the original height and width of the image, and you have a control by setting some properties of the image by saying height. Now here I may give it as, let's say, 300. Now 300 basically points out to the pixels. If you add pixels as well, that's a default value that you get in. So here I'm going to go back and say width also has 300 pixels. So if I save and come back, that's how the image gets resized. Right? So you can set the height and width of an image so that the image is being shown in a proper proportionate order of what you are wanting it to be. So that's how you use an image. But this image can act as an hypermedia. Now if you remember, we talked on the first day about hypertext and hypermedia. So hypertext, as we talked about, hypertext is something which is text containing hyperlinks. Right? But if I talk about hypermedia, it is not only text, but it can even have images as links. Fine, images or videos find to be as links. And this, I can do it again, so I can have these as links to be mapped in, and I can do it by wrapping the image using an anchor tag. So what I can do, I can just wrap this image using an anchor tag. Right? So I'm just going to take this off. I'm going to put it in here, right? And this href can point to a different location. So let's say, for example, I want this point to HTML5 specification, okay, the one that we visited yesterday. So if I just click on this URL, I'm just going to go back to this URL. That's what is going to be there, and I'm going to put it as an href. Now if you closely observe, if I go back to my UI where I'm seeing this image, can you see the hand sign, which if I click on it, fine, so the cursor or the cursor is changed, fine, it is pointer as a cursor which is pointing to something. Earlier it was not, fine, because now there is an anchor tag, and if I click onto it, as we learned, anchor tag basically allows you to navigate to the location, and this is the location which I want this image to point to. Right? That's how you can use an image as an hypermedia as well. So images are used not only for having some image being shown in, but it can also be used as an hypermedia with the anchor tag referring to href, and then can point to something. So you can have images which can point to different URLs and have those things act as an hypermedia so that we can refer to those links and the user can visit those links as a part. Right? That's how you work with images. Now with HTML5, right, you get another tag. So this image, these anchor tags, what you're working, h1 tags, divs, links, what we worked on are all HTML features. They're not specifically in HTML5, but yes, because they are part of HTML, they are part of HTML5 as well. But if you talk about it, none of these talks about new features. Okay, these were already there in HTML 4.01 as well, right? But what has changed with HTML5 is introduction of a new picture tag that basically takes care of loading a different picture altogether. So let's understand what is HTML5 picture element is. So the HTML element, which is the picture element, allows you to display different pictures for different devices or screen sizes. Yes, now you see it is kind of important, because when you talk about the clients, fine, if you remember, we talked about different clients. So what can be the clients that we are mentioning? Clients can be, so if I just go back to the next slide where we are seeing the clients can be PC, the clients can be smartphones, the client can also be laptop. Now each of these items do have different screen sizes. Now let's say, for example, you have a very large screen in the PC and you're wanting the image to be shown, which is a large image, but in a smartphone, if you want that image to be a smaller one, right, or maybe a completely different image altogether, you can do that by using picture. Earlier, fine, now there are different solutions to it. You can even do it by using CSS3 media queries, but because we have not learned CSS3, we can use this picture for doing it in a very simplistic manner. Right. So rather than having this 300 by 300 as a pixel thing in your PC or maybe even the laptop, but in a smartphone, 300 by 300 would occupy much of a size, and that's why I may not want this amount of large image to be shown in. That's why I may want a different image altogether to be loaded, maybe with a different size, and that's how I can use a picture image. Now, what this picture image does? This picture image, which your or picture tag, what you're using, this picture uses a picture, but it also makes use of source. So there can be different source which you are basically using in to give different images at different device sizes, okay, for different device sizes. And ultimately the last item that it uses, so we're going to have different sources, fine, corresponding to different devices. Fine, so I can have different sources for it, source set basically for the width and other things. So this is going to mention the width in the device that you are viewing on. Fine, each of these can be different width, and at the last I use my image tag, fine, to either select this one or select this one. Fine, so any of these can be there. So let's see how do we deal with this picture as an HTML element, right? So let's use the HTML5 picture tag with our Visual Studio Code. Now, if you do this, so I'm just going to take one thing because I'm already having that thing being ready. So if you have a look at, go back to trainings, if I just go back to OdinSchool, sample demos, I'm just going to have this folder being copied, put up into our web programming in module 3. I'm going to have a new folder being created, being pasted here, and that's what we're going to have. So if you see HTML5 picture, right, what I'm having two pictures, which is css3.png. Fine, that's my css3.png, and I'm having html5.png. So these are my two images which I'm having into a folder HTML5 picture. And what I do with this example.html is, here I just go back and use a picture tag which is new with HTML5, and I use the source tag with media as an attribute, and I give minimum hyphen width as 650 pixels. It means if the user width, the screen width is 650 pixels, fine, less than or greater than, we'll talk about it, then I want the source to be allowed. So when I say minimum width to be 650, fine, if that's the case, if this condition is true, then I would want my html5.png to be shown. If the width is less than 650, then I would want my css3.png to be shown. Now have a look at the picture tag. In this picture tag, we are having an image. Image by default refers to css3.png, whose height and width I am showing in. Now what, and you can see even the alternate text being specified, not, yeah, so css3, and this css3.png is what is going to be shown only if this condition is not met. If this condition is met, then html5.png is going to be made as a source from this source set. Okay, so we have the source set, and html5.png is what we are going to set it to the source. So if I right click and say open with live server, now what you see is an HTML5. So you can see the picture element resets the browser. We need to load different images, and now if you see the magic, which is if I go beyond, if I go less than 650, then css3 is loaded, but if I go beyond 650 pixels as the width, then HTML5 image is being loaded. So like I have the flexibility of loading different images, right, depending on the user device that is viewing on and the width that's available for me to use, right? So minimum hyphen width, I've given this as 650. It doesn't has to be 650. It can be any of these things. Now how do you know it is 650 or not? For that, what you can do is you can right click, go to inspect, right, and you can see this if I just zoom, can you see this device bar, okay, which is basically the device toolbar? So if I click onto it, it goes into a toggling mode of different devices. So here, now you can see the width, the moment, right? So 650 is what we call as kind of a breakpoint. So here we understand, okay, that if this condition is satisfied, then the image is what is going to be loaded is html5.png, right? So let's come back to the presentation. Right, so we have seen HTML5 picture, which is taking care, which is a new feature of HTML5, which was not present earlier, and we are using it so that we can actually display different images depending on the width size which is available. Right. So what we understood today was how the client and server interact. Fine. Now, when we worked with links, fine, every time I clicked on the link, I went back to the server. Server gave me the response with the link page, and that was rendered by the client. Fine. We also saw list, which can be of two types: ordered and unordered list, where I can go back and use the ordered list, which can be 1, 2, 3 or A, B, C, D in caps or small, and even Roman numbers as we have seen, or it can also be disk, circle or square. Then we work with images, where images form an important part, where we are trying to show some message to the user or even have some links to the user of that image, so it can also be used as a hypermedia. And then at the last, we talked about HTML5 picture element, which is a new feature of HTML5, and that will allow me to have different images to be shown depending on the size of the viewport that the user is browsing your application in. Right. So hope you have enjoyed the session. As I said, this is mostly going to be the hands-on session, and from now on we are all going to have mostly the hands-on sessions being done. So all of this I'm just going to share the URL with you guys, and you can have access to the source code that's available. Right. So I'll be putting the source code link in the description. Fine. And you'll have that link also available so that you can have an access to the source code and try out things at your end. Okay. So thank you all for being patient, and here's where we stop for the day. So please do not forget to like and subscribe. Thank you. See you tomorrow for the next session. Thank you.